Everyone thought Elise had finally found stability, marrying the town's most respected man in a winter ceremony straight out of a postcard. But less than 12 hours after saying "I do," she was found battered and bleeding in their honeymoon suite. What happened between the vows and violence? This isn't the kind of love story they tell at weddings. It's the kind that simmers in silence, masked by polite smiles and perfect photos. What begins as devotion slowly twists into possession. And by the time anyone realizes the truth, the damage is irreversible. In this story, affection was a weapon, and the honeymoon was a trap. It was the kind of cold that bit straight through wool. The church stood stoically at the top of the hill, blanketed in snow, its stained glass glinting with slivers of late afternoon light. Inside, warmth radiated from both the heater vents and the hopeful hearts of guests watching Elise Harper walk down the aisle. At 28, Elise looked every inch the classic bride, ivory lace gown hugging her slim frame, a cascade of golden curls, and a smile that seemed just the tiniest bit forced. Her groom, Daniel Whitmer, 31, wore a navy blue tuxedo and a smug confidence that gave off the energy of a man who believed he'd won. They had only known each other for 13 months. She'd moved to Eastwood Hollow from Syracuse after her mother's death. Daniel was already well known in the community, son of a retired sheriff, youth pastor at the local church, and the owner of a modest construction firm. Their romance bloomed fast, too fast by most people's standards, and though a few eyebrows had been raised, no one expected the wedding to end in screams. Elise had always been the quiet type. Reserved, observant, a girl who'd grown up too fast caring for her alcoholic mother. When she met Daniel at a grief support group held at the church, he was charming, almost too much so. He took charge quickly, organizing dinners, dropping by her home unannounced, buying her gifts she hadn't asked for. To the casual observer, it was romantic. To those with sharper instincts, it was possession dressed as affection. He always needed to know where she was, Elise's best friend Carly said in a later interview. At first it was cute, but then it became claustrophobic. Like she wasn't her own person anymore. The engagement came after just 5 months. Elise had said yes, but privately admitted she was unsure. Still, Daniel pushed forward, announcing the date, picking the venue, even choosing her dress designer. Elise, worn down and emotionally isolated, gave in. They moved in together 2 months before the wedding. That's when things turned. The friendly facade Daniel showed to the world cracked at home. Elise kept a journal, later recovered by police, where she detailed his moods. Sudden silences, jealousy, aggressive outbursts. He didn't hit her. Not yet. But he did raise his voice, slam doors, and accuse her of cheating if she was 5 minutes late. He made her feel small, powerless. I thought I could fix him, Elise wrote, or at least keep him calm long enough to make it to the wedding. But I've started to feel like I'm walking into a trap with a veil on. On the eve of their wedding, Daniel threw a rehearsal dinner at his family's hunting lodge. It was rustic, candlelit, intimate, and tense. Elise's cousin Matthew recalled that she barely ate. Daniel, meanwhile, drank more than usual, boasting about their future house, kids, and how lucky Elise was to be marrying into a real family. When Elise got up to use the restroom, he followed her. They were gone for nearly 20 minutes. When she returned, her mascara was smudged and she avoided eye contact. Later, guests would remember how she flinched when Daniel touched her lower back. The morning of the wedding, Elise left a voicemail for Carly. I don't know what to do. I keep telling myself I'm overthinking, but my gut is screaming. I'm scared, not of what'll happen if I don't marry him, but what might happen if I do. That message was never played until days later. She went through with the ceremony. The vows were spoken. The kiss was captured. But within hours, she was found unconscious in their honeymoon suite at the Cedar Pines Inn, bruises blooming along her arms and throat, and Daniel, disheveled, with blood on his sleeves, was standing in the hallway claiming she fell. Elise survived barely. But that night became the unraveling of a deeply disturbing pattern of coercion, gaslighting, and ultimately, a near-fatal encounter that would spark a criminal investigation shaking the entire town. It was the little things she overlooked at first: a raised voice during dinner, a controlling hand at her back, a locked drawer in his study. Elise thought it was stress. But behind Gregory's charm lay something far darker. And by the time she discovered what he'd been hiding, it was too late to leave without consequences. Elise Randall had always been the type of woman who noticed things. It was what made her good at her job as an occupational therapist, picking up on subtle changes in posture, expression, emotion. But after the wedding, that intuitive part of her began to flicker and fade. It wasn't love blindness. Not exactly. It was fatigue. A kind of emotional fog that settled over her the moment she moved into Gregory's sprawling old home in Canandaigua, New York, a place that had belonged to his grandparents and hadn't been updated since the late 90s. Gregory loved the place, always talking about heritage and legacy, but to Elise the house had a weight to it. The walls were thick, the rooms chilly. Her clothes always smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs, and the silence at night was complete. No passing cars, no streetlights, no neighbors close enough to hear a scream. At first it was easy to dismiss the unease. They were newlyweds. It was a transition. She told herself the tight feeling in her chest was just newness. Maybe even grief. She'd left behind her small apartment, her routine, her independence. But it was hard to ignore the tension that began to creep into everyday life. It started with rules. "Don't touch the thermostat," Gregory said one evening after she turned it up. "The furnace is sensitive, it throws off the whole system." He said it with a chuckle, but his eyes were flat and cold. Then came the lock study. He didn't like her going near it, always keeping the door shut tight. Private files, he claimed. Old financial stuff. She didn't push. Then there were the guests he didn't want around. "You're still seeing your sister so often?" he asked, almost offhandedly one Saturday. "Twice a month isn't much," Elise replied. Gregory smiled. "I just think we should focus on building us right now. Too many outside voices, they complicate things." And so, slowly, Elise stopped inviting people over. She withdrew from her sister, her co-workers. The couple's social life dwindled to dinners where Gregory spoke over her, steering every conversation, correcting her misremembered details with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. But the real red flag came one night, 3 weeks after the wedding. Elise had gone into town early to meet a friend for coffee, an old college friend passing through. She hadn't mentioned it. It had been last minute. She'd planned to tell Gregory later. But when she got home, she found him sitting in the dark, lights off, waiting. "I tried to call you," he said. "My phone died," she answered, holding it up to prove it. "Really? Because you always keep it charged." His tone was calm, almost gentle. But Elise could feel something coiled in the silence. "I just met a friend. It wasn't planned." "A man?" he asked softly. "No," she replied. "A woman. Sarah from Geneseo." He nodded once, then got up and walked to the kitchen wordlessly. That night he didn't touch her. The next morning he was all smiles and coffee, humming like nothing had happened. But the message had landed. "Don't go anywhere without telling me. Don't make me wait." After that, Elise started to feel like the walls were closing in. She kept a journal, but she had to hide it. She noticed Gregory going through her nightstand once, then calmly asking later, "Looking for something, honey?" She began locking it in a makeup bag, stuffing it behind the bathroom's loose wall tile. In her writing, she didn't accuse him. She questioned herself. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe she was just stressed. But then, something happened that broke her last bit of denial. It was late, almost midnight. Elise had gone downstairs for water. Gregory wasn't in bed. She heard a sound from the basement and assumed he was working on the heating unit again. But when she reached the bottom step, she froze. The study was open. Not just unlocked, but wide open. Gregory wasn't inside. Curious and anxious, Elise stepped in. And what she saw made her stomach clench. There were files, hundreds of them. Photos, notes, news clippings, surveillance printouts. All centered around Elise's ex-boyfriends, her former landlords, even a therapist she'd seen once in her early 20s. Gregory had cataloged her entire past, like she was a case file. There were logs of her menstrual cycle, photos of her at work, printed messages between her and her sister, screenshots from conversations Elise thought were private. She backed away, heart pounding, and almost screamed when Gregory's voice came from behind her. "You weren't supposed to see this yet." She turned. He was standing at the bottom of the basement steps, calm as ever. "Yet," she whispered. "I was going to show you," he said. "Eventually. After we were stronger." Elise didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, eyes open, while Gregory's breathing slowed beside her. And that was the moment she knew she wasn't living with a husband. She was living with a keeper. Every plan she made, he had already anticipated. Every secret phone call, every hidden note, every escape route, cut off before she even tried. Elise didn't know how, but Gregory seemed to be one step ahead at all times. And in a house that now felt like a prison, she was running out of ways to survive. The morning after Elise discovered the files in Gregory's study, she pretended nothing had happened. She smiled at breakfast, asked about his schedule, kissed him goodbye at the door like it was any other Tuesday. But as soon as he left, she locked the door behind him and collapsed against it, heart racing. She had to leave. That thought rang like a fire alarm in her head. But how? Gregory wasn't just manipulative, he was calculating, obsessive, and judging from the material she saw, dangerous. She reached for her phone to call her sister, but the screen remained black. Dead. That was strange, she had charged it the night before. Plugging it in, nothing happened. She tried a second charger. Still dead. Her phone had been tampered with. That's when the real fear began to settle into her bones. She needed a plan. Not just an exit, but a clean, quiet escape. One Gregory couldn't trace. But in a small upstate town where everyone knew Gregory's name, and he controlled most of their financial life, Elisa's options were limited. She went upstairs, checked her laptop, and tried logging into her email. Wrong password. She tried again. Locked out. She clicked forgot password. Security questions had changed. Then came the worst discovery of all. Her bank account, where she'd once had her own private savings, was now empty. Transferred. Mersh. The details blurred together on the screen. Gregory had quietly linked their accounts weeks ago. That's when she realized she was financially trapped. He hadn't just married her. He'd absorbed her. Elise sank onto the edge of the bed, blinking back tears. Panic rose in her throat, thick and hot. Her body trembled. But something in her, a small, quiet spark of survival, refused to let go. She opened the bathroom wall tile and retrieved her hidden journal. She flipped through the pages until she found the back where she scribbled, "Find a way out. Use cash. Act normal." She hid the journal again. That evening, when Gregory returned, he was unusually affectionate. He brought flowers. Ordered takeout from her favorite restaurant in Rochester. Even lit candles. "We've been off lately," he said softly. "I know you've been tense. And I take responsibility for that." Elise blinked. "You do?" "Of course," he said. "I should have told you about the files. I was trying to understand you better. I thought it would help me protect you." That word chilled her to the bone. Protect. Like she was something to own. Gregory cupped her face. "I love you, Elise, and I want us to get stronger. Together." She nodded, smiled, kissed his cheek. Inside she screamed. That night, while he slept, Elise crept out of bed. She moved silently down the stairs, grabbing her coat and one of Gregory's flashlights from the drawer. She knew the motion sensors would trigger if she left through the front or back doors. But the basement had a side hatch that led to the outside. She'd seen it once during a thunderstorm when Gregory had gone to check for flooding. She opened it carefully, muscles tense. No alarm. No light. She stepped into the cold night. Moonlight filtered through the trees. The wind stung her cheeks. But she didn't care. She made it 2 blocks before a pair of headlights appeared in the road ahead. A black SUV. Gregory's SUV. Elise ducked into a ditch, heart pounding so loudly she swore it echoed. The vehicle passed slowly. Then stopped. She held her breath. It didn't reverse. It didn't linger. It kept driving. She waited 5 full minutes before moving again. Not toward the town. Toward the old train depot on the edge of town. Abandoned, but still a landmark. She'd stashed $60 in an old shoebox years ago from a garage sale. It was still there. Enough for a bus ticket out of town. She crouched in the cold for hours, her hands shaking from both fear and frost. But no one came. At 6:10 a.m., she crept back to the house, slipping through the basement hatch like nothing had happened. Gregory was already in the kitchen when she got upstairs. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, stirring coffee. "No," she whispered. He looked up. "You're wearing boots." She froze. He smiled. "Must have gotten cold last night." She said nothing, just nodded. Inside, something in her cracked. He knew. He always knew. Elise spent the next few days watching, waiting. She began counting everything. How many times Gregory checked the basement, how many locks were on the windows, how often her phone moved locations when she hadn't touched it. It was clear now, she wasn't just being monitored. She was being studied. By the time the police would ever believe her, if they even did, she'd be dead. She had to get creative. Not just escape, vanish. And so she began crafting her final plan. A plan Gregory would never see coming. By the time the neighbors heard the shattering glass, Elise had already vanished. There were no screams. No calls for help. Just silence and a smear of blood on the kitchen counter. What happened behind those locked doors that night? The winter in upstate New York that year was relentless. Cold enough to frost over the windows and isolate every household in a cocoon of ice and silence. Elise had stopped attending book club. She didn't go to church anymore. At first, her absence was chalked up to newlywed bliss, but the truth was far more complicated. Behind the elegant curtains of the master bedroom in the Dalton home, a war was raging, one that left no physical evidence, only wounds Elise carried inside her. The day before it all cracked open, Elise made a call to her sister Lauren. "I'm fine," she had whispered, voice trembling. I need time to think." But Lauren heard the undertone, the hollow sound of someone rehearsing calm under pressure. Elise never used to whisper. At 9:42 p.m. that evening, a neighbor heard glass shatter. It wasn't loud, more like the clink of a wineglass being knocked from a table, but it was enough to make her peek through the blinds. She saw the silhouette of Grant standing in the kitchen, shirtless, pacing. Elise was nowhere in sight. By morning, Elise had vanished. When Lauren didn't hear back the next day, she called the sheriff's office. "My sister's not answering her phone. I think something's wrong," she told dispatch. Deputy Sarah Molina was the first on scene. She knocked 3 times. No answer. But the front door wasn't locked. It never was in Crestview Hollow. Inside, everything looked pristine, until she got to the kitchen. A broken crystal vase lay in a pile beside a small pool of blood smeared across the counter's edge. Next to it sat a single mug, Mrs. Dalton, painted in soft gold script. There was no sign of Elise. Grant claimed she'd left the night before. She said she needed air. "I figured she went to her sister's," he said with a shrug, as if his wife disappearing into a freezing upstate night was an everyday occurrence. His tone was flat, unconcerned. But something in his eyes flickered, like a man trying to remember what expression to wear. A bolo was issued, and volunteers from the community combed nearby woods, ravines, and backroads. It didn't take long before the media caught wind. Newlywed vanishes in Crestview Hollow made the 6 o'clock news, and the town's perfect image began to crumble. Back at the station, Deputy Molina dug deeper. Elise had no credit card activity, no phone pings, no bag taken. And then came the most chilling find. Elise's wedding dress, still hanging in their bedroom closet, was ripped at the neckline. Torn, not by accident but violently. "That's just how she left it after the wedding," Grant insisted. "She never got around to preserving it." But Lauren knew better. She loved that dress, she told investigators. She said it made her feel like she was finally living her own fairy tale. The search intensified. Dive teams dragged nearby lakes. Cadaver dogs sniffed through snow-covered woods. Nothing. Until a breakthrough came not from forensics, but from an anonymous envelope left at the sheriff's station 3 days later. Inside was a note, typed and unsigned. "Look behind the fireplace. He hides more than ashes." Deputy Molina and her team returned to the Dalton home with a search warrant. Behind the gas fireplace, in a small hidden cavity meant for old wood storage, they found a velvet box. Inside were torn photos, shredded wedding pictures with Elise's face scratched out. And beneath that, a black journal. It was Elise's. In it, she chronicled months of emotional abuse. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the way Grant tracked her every move under the guise of protecting her. One passage read, "He tells me I don't remember things correctly, that I imagine pain. But I feel it. In the silence. In how I flinch when the door closes." The journal entries became more desperate near the end. Her final entry, dated 2 nights before her disappearance, simply read, "He said I'm the only thing standing between him and peace. If I disappear, don't believe it was my choice." The town turned against Grant overnight. He was brought in for questioning. The district attorney didn't yet have a body or a murder weapon, but they had motive, pattern, and a terrified voice from beyond the grave. Still, without Elise's body, prosecutors were hesitant to file murder charges. The DA considered psychological abuse hard to prove in court without physical evidence. But then a second letter arrived, again anonymous. "Check under the koi pond liner." She tried to run. He didn't let her. The koi pond was serene, until they peeled back the black liner. What lay beneath wasn't just a clue, it was a revelation that would fracture the town and ignite a trial with no body. How do you prosecute a murder when the victim's still missing? It was a Tuesday morning when the search team arrived at the Dalton residence with shovels, pumps, and grim resolve. The koi pond in the backyard had always been a tranquil centerpiece, surrounded by lantern-lit stones and flanked by frozen lilies. But it wasn't the fish investigators were after. The second anonymous letter had been precise. Check under the koi pond liner. Forensics carefully drained the murky water, scooping out stunned orange koi one by one. As the last of the water was pumped out, a stench began to rise, earthy, metallic, and unmistakably wrong. Beneath the rubber pond liner they found something unusual: loose bricks unevenly stacked. As they removed each one, a shallow cavity came into view. And there, half wrapped in a weather-stained tarp, were the shredded remains of a bloody duvet cover. No body. But soaked into the fabric were high concentrations of Elise's blood, enough to suggest fatal injuries. The pond liner had been newly replaced, purchased only 3 weeks before Elise's disappearance. A receipt was found in Grant's car, dated 2 days before Christmas. Investigators now had physical evidence and motive, but still, no body. The media swarmed. Headlines exploded. Murder without a body, husband at center of mysterious disappearance. Blood beneath the pond, Crestview Hollow's nightmare. Public opinion shifted violently. Where once neighbors had defended Grant's calm demeanor, now they called it chilling. Rumors swirled that he'd been visiting the basement late at night, that he had an old hunting knife collection, that he once joked at poker night about the perfect way to disappear someone in winter. But even with growing public outrage, the district attorney, Marla Briggs, hesitated. "We have strong circumstantial evidence," she said at a press conference, "but we're still awaiting DNA confirmation and cannot yet file homicide charges. The investigation remains ongoing." Privately, Briggs wrestled with the biggest dilemma of her career. Could she convince a jury to convict a man of murder with no corpse? The answer came once again from an unlikely source. 3 days after the pond search, Lauren received a package. No return address. Inside was a flash drive and a folded sheet of paper. "Elise wanted you to have this. If something happened to her, she said it might save her life, or at least her truth." Lauren brought it straight to detectives. On the flash drive was a video recording, Elise sitting cross-legged in her bedroom, tear-streaked and trembling. The timestamp read, December 17, 2023. "If you're watching this, something went wrong," she began, her voice cracking. "I've stayed longer than I should have. I thought love would fix this. But Grant, he doesn't love. He owns. He controls. And I think he might kill me." She held up a note with the words, "This is not a suicide. I would never leave willingly." The room was silent as detectives watched. Then Lauren whispered, "She knew. She knew he would do this." That was the final push. The district attorney moved quickly. Grant Dalton was arrested on charges of second-degree murder and evidence tampering. The town was stunned, yet not surprised. People gathered outside the courthouse with candles and signs. Some still defended him. Others shouted, "Justice for Elise." But the trial wouldn't be easy. Without a body, defense attorneys painted Elise as unstable, emotional, even capable of staging her disappearance. They brought up an old therapy note about Elise's fears of abandonment and tried to imply she had a history of dramatic behavior. It was a brutal smear campaign. But the prosecution came prepared. They played the video, displayed the blood-soaked bedding, showed journal entries detailing a pattern of coercive control and fear. Perhaps the most powerful witness was Deputy Sarah Molina. She feared him, Molina testified. She documented it. She anticipated her own death. And he acted exactly the way abusers do when no one's watching. Still, without a body, reasonable doubt hovered like fog. And then, on day 9 of the trial, something shifted. A construction crew digging for a new foundation less than half a mile from the Dalton home struck a strange bundle buried near a dry culvert. It was Elise, partially decomposed, wrapped in the same quilt seen in wedding photos, her body hidden beneath cement bags and broken branches. The autopsy confirmed what many already believed: blunt force trauma to the head, defensive wounds on her arms. The cause of death was officially listed as homicide. The trial took a dramatic turn. The defense crumbled. The final juror nodded solemnly when the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. Grant Dalton was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As the judge read the sentence, he remained emotionless, just as he had been throughout the investigation. Cold, controlled, silent. Lauren wept softly in the front row. "She's free now," she whispered. "And he'll never control anyone again." The town of Crestview Hollow tried to move on, but the echoes of Elise's final days would linger in courtrooms, classrooms, and living rooms for years to come. What happens when a tragedy forces a community to confront everything it ignored? The trial of Grant Dalton ended with a unanimous guilty verdict, but for the residents of Crestview Hollow, it was far from over. The courtroom lights dimmed. The reporters moved on. But the aftermath rippled through every brick of the small upstate New York town. Lauren, Elise's sister, had become both a symbol and a vessel, grief-stricken, yes, but also determined. Within weeks of the sentencing, she partnered with advocacy groups to establish the Elise Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to raising awareness about coercive control, psychological abuse, and no-body homicide cases. Their first campaign? A petition to expand New York's domestic violence laws to explicitly include non-physical abuse. "My sister tried to leave," Lauren said at a state hearing. But Grant never hit her. He isolated, manipulated, and gaslit her. And until it was too late, the law couldn't touch him. The petition gained over 300,000 signatures. Legislators took notice. In April 2025, New York passed the Elise's Law, allowing prosecutors to file charges based on patterns of controlling behavior, even without physical violence. It was a landmark moment. Annalise's face was everywhere, on billboards, magazine covers, and podcasts retelling her story. Back in Crestview Hollow, the mood was complicated. Some still defended Grant. "He was always so polite," said one elderly neighbor. "You never really know people, I guess." But others turned inward, reflecting on the small signs they ignored. "She stopped coming to book club," said Susan Marsh, Elise's old co-worker. "She'd text, but it never sounded like her. I should have reached out more." The town church held a memorial service. The same church where Elise and Grant had exchanged vows only 5 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Pastor Riley stood before a full congregation. "We failed one of our own," he said. "Let this never happen again." Meanwhile, a new family moved into the Dalton house, but not before the koi pond was filled in, the basement repainted, and the rose bushes Elise had loved so dearly uprooted and replaced. The new owners didn't want reminders, but the rest of the town couldn't forget. Elise's story reached far beyond Crestview Hollow. In Texas, a woman trapped in a controlling marriage saw Elise's video online and sought help for the first time. In Ohio, a prosecutor reopened a cold case involving a missing woman and a controlling husband. And in Los Angeles, a podcast series titled, "She Tried to Tell Us," featured Elise's story in a 3-part expose that went viral, receiving over 2 million downloads in 2 weeks. The ripple effect was undeniable. As for Lauren, she continued to speak, but only when she was ready. "There are days I wish I could shut it all off," she admitted in an interview. But if her story saves even one woman like her, then Elise didn't die in vain. She returned to the courtroom once more in late May, not to testify, but to sit quietly as a new victim protection bill was passed. Her fingers gripped Elise's wedding ring, now hanging on a silver chain around her neck. At the anniversary vigil in December, 1,000 candles lit up the snow-dusted town square. A choir sang softly as photos of Elise flickered on a makeshift screen. Smiling, dancing, alive. Lauren stood before the crowd and said something she had been holding in for a long time. He tried to silence her, but she found a way to speak. And now we're listening. What starts as love can sometimes end in tragedy, and the line between the two is thinner than we think. If this case left you questioning everything, you're not alone. Be sure to subscribe for more twisted true crime stories that dig deeper than headlines. And if you're ready for another jaw-dropping case, click on the next video. Someone always knows more than they're saying. The question is, will you be the one to uncover it?